He smiled as he took the check. $40,000, everything I had left. But when I showed up Friday morning to start the miracle treatment he promised my dying 5-year-old, the clerk blinked and said, "We have no record of any protocol under your son's name." I ran to his office. Security dragged me out before I could scream. That bastard took my life savings and made me look insane doing it. Now Ethan's fever's climbing, the money's gone, and I'm banned from half the hospital. But I'm not done, because the moment he lied to me, he handed me something more dangerous than cash. Motive. And a very old friend of mine keeps receipts for a living. What we uncovered next? It doesn't just expose him. It burns the whole system. And we've only got 13 days left. My name is Michael Mercer, and I'm 45 years old. Between early shifts at the machine shop and overtime at the warehouse, I've built a modest life centered around my 5-year-old son, Ethan's dinosaur-themed bedroom, and infectious laugh. My late wife Sarah's photo still watches over our breakfast routine, though the hospital visits have changed everything lately. Dr. Randall, our oncologist, delivers his practice speeches about treatment options, while my boy traces invisible patterns on the cold exam table. I notice things. Always have. Every receipt tucked away, every conversation logged in my worn notebook, and every forced smile from Dr. Randall when Ethan tries to make him laugh. My old college roommate Mark, now a sharp-eyed journalist who beat cancer himself last year, taught me to trust those instincts. But let me start from the beginning. I was counting the ceiling tiles in pediatrics, a habit I'd picked up during our long stays, when Dr. Randall swept in that Tuesday morning. His white coat looked freshly pressed, and those gold cufflinks caught the fluorescent light as he pulled up his usual rolling stool. You know the type. Everything just so, like he'd stepped out of a medical drama. "Michael," he said, folding his hands in that practiced way of his, "we've been monitoring Ethan's response to the standard protocol, and I believe I have something that could change everything." Ethan barely looked up from his coloring book, already too used to these grown-up talks. The IV pump hummed its steady rhythm beside him, marking time like it always did. But something in Randall's tone made me sit straighter. "There's a breakthrough treatment," he continued, "and Ethan's profile matches perfectly. The success rates we're seeing," he paused, letting that word, success, hang in the air. "They're unprecedented." My heart started racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. "That's fantastic news. When can we start?" That's when his expression shifted, just slightly, mind you, the kind of shift you'd miss if you weren't watching for it. "There's something we need to discuss first. Insurance won't cover experimental treatments, regardless of their promise. Have you ever felt hope and dread arrive at exactly the same moment?" That's what hit me right then. "We have a very limited window," he went on, glancing at his watch. The light caught those cufflinks again. "The treatment protocol has strict timing requirements. We need to secure Ethan's slot by Friday." "This Friday?" My voice sounded hollow even to me. He nodded, his pause perfectly timed. "The cost is $40,000. The IV pump kept its steady beat while those numbers crashed around in my head. 40,000. Might as well have been 40 million in that moment. "I understand this is significant," he added, watching me with what looked like concern. "But given Ethan's case," I glanced at my boy, still focused on his drawing. He was sketching what looked like a boat, his tongue stuck out in concentration, just like his mother used to do. The sight of him there, so small against those hospital sheets, made my decision before I'd even finished thinking it through. "How do I pay?" I heard myself ask. Randall smiled, that practiced professional smile. "I'll have my office prepare the paperwork, but remember, Friday." After he left, I stepped into the hallway and called my bank. The house had some equity, not much, but some. I had about 15,000 saved up, and my 401k could cover another chunk if I took the penalty hit. While the hold music played, I started making a mental list. My grandfather's guitar collection, my welding equipment from my side jobs, that vintage Snap-on tool chest in the garage. You ever notice how pride feels different when you're a parent? All those things I'd worked years to acquire, they turned to nothing but numbers on a page the moment I looked back through that door and saw Ethan adding stick figures to his boat picture. I pulled out my phone and started making a list of names. Old buddies from the shop, my sister in Cleveland, Sarah's parents who still sent Ethan birthday cards. I even drafted out what I'd say, trying to find words that wouldn't sound like begging but would convey the urgency. Back in the room, I sat looking at my phone's calendar, that Friday square staring back at me like a countdown clock. The IV pump kept its rhythm, but now it sounded different, like it was counting down too, measuring out moments we couldn't afford to waste. 3 days, 72 hours to come up with $40,000. Pride's expensive, sure. But time? Time's worth everything when it's your kid's future you're buying. The next 48 hours turned into a blur of phone calls and paperwork. Ever try to turn your whole life into cash while watching your kid drift in and out of medicated sleep? Not exactly how I'd planned to spend my week, but there we were. The bank manager, Dave, had known me since I opened my first checking account 15 years ago. His office still had that same fake plant in the corner, gathering dust while we talked numbers. "Michael, I can push this through as an emergency equity draw," he said, tapping his keyboard. "But you're looking at some serious interest rates here." I nodded, watching the numbers scroll across his screen. "Whatever it takes, Dave. Just need it by tomorrow." You know that feeling when you're signing away years of equity you built up? Your hand gets heavy, like the pen's made of lead. But I kept thinking about Ethan's stick figure boat drawing, now folded in my wallet, and somehow my signature came out steady. Back at the hospital, I worked my phone like a telemarketer between Ethan's afternoon labs. Called my buddy Steve first. He'd just gotten his yearly bonus. Then Tom from the machine shop. And finally my sister's husband Gary, who'd been trying to pay me back for years. Anyway, each call started the same. "Hey, I need a favor and I know it's a lot." They came through, 3 deposits hitting my account by Wednesday night. Funny how crisis strips away all the small talk, leaves you with just the bare bones of friendship. No excuses, no hesitation, just how much? And when do you need it? That vintage Gibson Les Paul I'd inherited from my dad, the one I'd sworn I'd pass down to Ethan someday, posted it online Wednesday night while Ethan was getting his evening meds. Guy showed up in the hospital parking lot 2 hours later, counting out cash under those buzzing sodium lights. Felt like some kind of drug deal, except all I was selling was memories. "You sure about this?" the buyer asked, cradling the case. "It's a beautiful piece." My hands still smelled like the guitar's aged wood when I got back to Ethan's room. He was asleep, peaceful for once, his dinosaur blanket pulled up to his chin. The night nurse, Maria, gave me a thumbs up. His numbers were holding steady. Thursday afternoon, I walked into Dr. Randall's office with a cashier's check that represented pretty much everything I had in the world. He took it with that smile of his, thin and precise, like something folded out of paper. "Excellent," he said, sliding some forms across his desk. "Just need your signature on these treatment protocols." The paperwork looked official enough. Lots of medical terms I couldn't pronounce, and warnings about experimental procedures. Maybe if I hadn't been running on coffee and fear for 3 days straight, I might have read it more carefully. But when your kid's life is on the line, you don't exactly stop to diagram sentences. Maria agreed to cover an extra shift so I could bring Ethan in early for his pre-treatment blood work. "He's my favorite patient anyway," she winked, adjusting his IV line. I wrote, "Treatment Protocol Day," on a yellow sticky note and stuck it in my notebook, right next to where I'd tucked the check stub. Everything organized, everything documented. Old habits die hard, I guess. That night, lying on the pull-out chair in Ethan's room, I couldn't sleep. The ventilators from down the hall kept up their rhythmic whoosh, like mechanical waves. Ethan's boat drawing crinkled in my pocket when I shifted position. Tomorrow morning, we'd be first in line at admissions, ready to start this breakthrough treatment that would change everything. But something felt off. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the way Randall's smile hadn't quite reached his eyes when he took that check. Relief should feel lighter than this, shouldn't it? Instead, it sat in my stomach like a stone. Friday morning came. Early, though I hadn't really slept. I was at the admissions desk before the sun cleared the parking garage, my notebook tucked under my arm like some kind of shield. The same fluorescent lights that had watched me count guitar money 2 nights ago now hummed over my shoulder while I waited for the clerk to pull up Ethan's file. She clicked through screens, frowning slightly. "I'm not seeing any scheduled protocols for today. Let me check the research database." "It should be right there," I said, pulling out the paperwork. "Dr. Randall set everything up yesterday. We paid the—" My voice caught. "We handled all the administrative requirements." More clicking, more frowning. "I'm not finding anything under your son's name or ID number. Are you sure it's supposed to start today?" The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. You ever have one of those moments where reality starts to crack around the edges? "Could you check again? Please?" "Sir, I've looked through every active protocol in our system." She gestured vaguely down the hall. "You might want to check with research, but—" I was already moving, my shoes squeaking against the polished floors as I half walked, half ran to Randall's office suite. The receptionist looked up from her computer, all professional polish and practiced smile. "I need to see Dr. Randall, right now." I tried to keep my voice steady, but something must have leaked through because her smile stiffened. "Dr. Randall is with residents this morning. If you'd like to make an appointment, No appointments. This can't wait. I pulled out the treatment paperwork, now wrinkled from my grip. Just page him. Please. Sir, I cannot interrupt teaching rounds. That's hospital policy. If you'd like to leave a message. The inner office door opened and there he was, surrounded by a cluster of young doctors in short white coats. Our eyes met for just a second before he looked away, continuing some lecture about treatment protocols like I was invisible. Something snapped. I pushed past the receptionist's desk, my hands shaking. Where's the money, Randall? Where's this miracle treatment you promised? Security arrived so fast they must have been right around the corner. Two guys built like linebackers materialized beside me, their badges catching the overhead light. Sir, you need to come with us. The bigger one had his hand on my arm, firm, but not quite rough. Not yet. Just tell me where the money went, I was yelling now, watching Randall's face stay perfectly calm as he spoke quietly to the second guard. They walked me out past the pediatrics wing, past Maria's station where she stood with her hand over her mouth. I caught fragments of Randall's voice behind us, smooth as ever. Unfortunate misunderstanding. Clearly struggling with the research timeline. Need to consider patient safety. In the lobby, they had me wait while they made notes in the visitor log. I saw the words aggressive behavior and possible restricted access being written in neat block letters. Just like that, I was marked. The reasonable father turned problem parent. The morning sun hit me like a slap when I stepped outside. The air tasted like metal. Or maybe that was just rage burning the back of my throat. I pulled out my phone with hands that wouldn't quite steady. Patient relations, voicemail. Hospital compliance, voicemail. Ethics department, voicemail. I left message after message, each one sounding more desperate than the last. This is Michael Mercer, regarding Dr. Randall and a research protocol payment. Please, call me back. This is urgent. Between calls, I stared at that damn paperwork, now looking more like a prop than a promise. All those official-looking terms meant nothing. The money, Ethan's chance, my credibility, all of it had vanished into a maze of hospital policy and professional doubt. My phone beeped its last warning just as the ethics department kicked me to voicemail for the fourth time. Battery dying. Just like every other lifeline I'd counted on this morning. Ever notice how time moves differently when you're watching numbers drain? I spent that evening staring at two displays that kept trading punches. Ethan's temperature monitor and our online banking portal. His fever climbed while our balance dropped, each beep and notification like another nail in the coffin of my competence. 101.2, Maria murmured, adjusting Ethan's cooling blanket. We might need to start him on the stronger antibiotics soon. She didn't mention the cost, but I could feel it hanging there. I nodded, throat tight, and pulled up the prescription coverage website on my phone. The copays had doubled since last month. Something about network changes and tier adjustments. More corporate speak masking simple math. We couldn't afford what Ethan needed. Dad? Ethan's voice was thin, but his eyes still held that spark. Can you tell me about the fishing boat again? I settled into the chair beside him, pushing away the financial portal's angry red warnings. Sure, buddy. Remember that little green one we saw at the lake last summer? The one with the fancy fish finder? With the radio that played country music too loud? That's the one. I managed a smile, remembering how the owner had apologized for the noise while helping us net a stubborn base. Maybe we'll get out there again soon, just you and me. On Saturday? He perked up slightly. After cartoons? My chest tightened. We'll see how you're feeling, okay? For now, let's focus on getting that temperature down. While Ethan dozed, I tried calling my sister Janet. Third time today, each conversation shorter, her tone shifting from concern to something closer to pity. Mike, are you sure you didn't misunderstand something? 40,000 is a lot to hand over without... I know what I heard, I cut in, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Look, never mind. I'll figure something out. I spread my collection of receipts and paperwork across the little bedside table, appointment summaries, payment confirmation, even the visitor's log from this morning with its damning notes about my aggressive behavior. Dates, times, signatures, but nothing concrete enough to prove fraud. The laptop screen glowed accusingly as I opened a fresh email addressed to the hospital board. My fingers hovered over the keys, but what could I say? Dear directors, your star oncologist took my money and my dignity. Please help. Delete. Instead, I started a new document. What I can prove. The cursor blinked at me for 10 solid minutes before I managed 2 lines. December 14th. Paid $40,000 to Dr. Randall. December 15th. No protocol exists. The rest was just my word against his, and we both knew who's carried more weight in these halls. I was staring at those pathetic bullet points, rehearsing how to tell my wife I'd gambled away our safety net, when footsteps echoed in the corridor. Heavy ones, with the slight drag I remembered from college basketball games. Mark's old knee injury acting up again. He filled the doorway like he always did, all 6'4" of him wrapped in a weathered leather jacket. That spiral notebook he carried everywhere was tucked under one arm, and his face wore the same half-smile I'd seen the day he told me his cancer was in remission. Heard you might need a second opinion. Mark's voice was quiet, mindful of Ethan's sleep. He tapped his notebook against his leg, a nervous tick from our reporting days on the college paper. The nurse's station smells like bullshit and broken promises. Reminds me of my own dance with the medical machine. Something small and warm flickered in my chest, the first hint of hope I'd felt since morning. The hallway lights dimmed to their evening setting, casting long shadows as Mark pulled up a chair and opened his notebook. Start from the beginning, he said, clicking his pen. And don't skip the details. I beat cancer once. I know this smell. I glanced at Ethan, peaceful despite the fever. Then back to my old friend's familiar, determined expression. That tiny flame kicked harder against the darkness. I should have seen it coming. I pulled out the checkbook carbon copy, while Mark sketched in his notebook. The way he timed everything, hitting us with the news right after a rough round of tests, pushing that Friday deadline. Classic pressure sale, looking back. Pressure's how these guys work, Mark said, his pen scratching across the page. They know exactly when parents are most vulnerable. Walk me through the money part again. I described writing the cashier's check, how Dr. Randall had barely glanced at it before sliding it into a manila envelope. Mark's hand moved steadily, drawing lines between boxes on his paper. Here's what I've pieced together so far, he said, turning the notebook so I could see. He'd mapped out a web of connections, all circling around Dr. Randall's name. Our friend's got his fingers in more pies than just this hospital. There's a private clinic registered under Sunrise Medical Solutions LLC, different address, but the paperwork trails back to him through 3 layers of shell companies. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as we divided up the work. I'd gather every scrap of evidence from our interactions, receipts, emails, appointment summaries, even the visitor log entries. Mark would dig into the public records, tax filings, property records, malpractice complaints. Document everything, Mark insisted. Times, dates, names, especially names. I nodded, already planning my next move. That receptionist who stonewalled me this morning. Bet she knows more than she let on. Just be careful, Mark warned. You're already flagged as problematic. Maybe chat up the other office staff instead. Get badge names and desk locations. We need to establish who knew what, when. While Ethan slept, I made another circuit of the administrative offices, noting names and times in my phone. Sarah at the front desk, Tony in medical records, Jennifer handling insurance verification. Each interaction became another data point in our growing timeline. Mark's laptop glowed as he scrolled through billing records. Look at this pattern, he murmured. Other families who've seen Randall, their insurance statements show some weird coding. Services that don't match standard protocols, billing addresses that bounce around. My pulse quickened. A money tunnel. Exactly. He's moving cash through that private clinic somehow, but we need to prove where it goes and what it's supposedly paying for. I reached for my phone again, dialing patient relations for what felt like the 100th time. This time, I carefully logged the call. 11:42 p.m. Spoke with Kevin, ticket number 47392. One more documented attempt at working through proper channels. We should talk to other families, I said, watching Ethan's chest rise and fall in the dim light. There have to be more people he's done this to. Mark shook his head. Not yet. We'd just be spreading panic without proof. Plus, if Randall gets wind that we're asking questions, yeah, I rubbed my eyes. But we need something concrete. The money trail's there, but without patient names or actual services. One step at a time. Mark circled clinic twice on his flowchart, then added another arrow. Let's focus on what we can verify through public records first. Follow the paperwork, build the pattern. The wall clock ticked past midnight as we hunched over our notes. We had momentum now. The outline of something bigger than just my $40,000, but momentum wasn't proof, and proof was what we needed. I looked over at Ethan again, remembering his question about Saturday cartoons. Time wasn't just money anymore. It was measured in white blood cell counts and treatment windows. Whatever we were going to do, we needed to do it fast. Mark seemed to read my thoughts. We'll find it, he said quietly, drawing another circle on his diagram. There's always a weak spot in schemes like this. Always. The next morning, Mark and I huddled over bitter coffee in the hospital cafeteria, while the sunrise painted the windows orange. My hands shook as I marked up Ethan's treatment calendar, but not from the caffeine. 2 weeks, I said, drawing a thick red circle around the 15th. That's what his last oncologist told me before all this started. Miss that window? And his chances… I couldn't finish the sentence. Mark's jaw tightened. Then we work backward, from there. What's our timeline look like? I pulled out my phone and started counting days aloud. Labs on Monday and Thursday. Transfusion probably midweek, depending on his numbers. Follow up with the new oncology team next Tuesday, assuming they can squeeze us in. Okay, so we work around those. Mark opened his laptop. First step, document everything through official channels. Creates a paper trail, timestamps our concerns. You ever notice how time moves differently in hospitals? The fluorescent lights make every hour feel the same, but that morning, each minute felt like it was scratching itself into my skin. We spent the next 2 hours filing complaints. Compliance, state medical board, even the hospital's ethics committee. Every submission got an automated response promising review in due course. Like we had time for due course. Check this out, Mark said, turning his screen toward me. He'd found a parents' forum where someone described a similar situation. Urgent treatment, cash payment, disappeared doctor. No names mentioned, but the details matched. I remembered the way Dr. Randall had smiled when I handed over that check. Can we trace the poster? Accounts deleted, Mark sighed. But I'm archiving everything I find. Building a pattern. My phone buzzed. Another form response from patient relations. Due to privacy considerations and ongoing internal review, I didn't bother reading the rest. Around noon, I had to step away for Ethan's blood draw. The nurse frowned at his numbers while I tried not to look at the red circle on his whiteboard. When I got back, Mark had compiled a spreadsheet of similar complaints spanning 3 years. It's still all circumstantial, he admitted. We need something concrete. Billing records, patient names, actual services rendered. I called a legal aid clinic during Ethan's nap, hoping they'd see enough smoke to help us find the fire. The lawyer was sympathetic, but clear. Without documented proof of fraud, we can't file for emergency injunctive relief. Suspicion isn't enough, no matter how strong. Back in Ethan's room, Saturday morning cartoons played unwatched while he slept. I studied his face, thinner now than just weeks ago. The IV pump counted down drops like a metronome measuring time we couldn't spare. We need one solid link, I told Mark when he returned with fresh coffee. Just one document that shows his clinic billing for ghost patients or non-existent treatments. Something that proves the money's going somewhere specific. Mark nodded, already typing. I've got a contact in medical billing. She might be able to… The PA system crackled. Shift change. All departments, shift change. Another day gone. I looked at the red circle on Ethan's board, then at my son's sleeping face. 13 days left to crack this thing open. 13 days to find proof before our window slammed shut. I'm going to check his clinic's address again, Mark said, his voice low. There might be something in the property records we missed. I pulled out my notebook, the one with the check stub still locked inside, and started a fresh page. Somewhere in all these numbers and names, there had to be a thread we could pull. One loose end that would unravel everything. The evening shift nurses started their rounds, their squeaking shoes marking time in the hallway. I thought about that Friday deadline again, how easily Dr. Randall had played me. Now we had our own deadline. But this time, I wasn't running scared. This time, I was hunting. Ever notice how hope dies differently in a hospital? Not all at once, but in little pieces. Like paint flaking off an old wall. I'd managed to keep it together most of the day. Making calls, checking records, anything to feel like I was moving forward. But then Ethan looked up from his coloring book, pale face serious as a judge, and asked, "Dad, are we still going fishing when the boats wake up?" My throat closed up. Last summer, we'd watched the marina come alive at dawn. All those boats bobbing like lazy ducks while their captains did their morning checks. I'd promised him we'd do that again when spring came. "Sure, buddy," I managed. "Soon as you're feeling stronger." He nodded and went back to coloring. But something in me cracked. I had to get out of that room before he saw it. The pediatric wings corridor stretched ahead of me like a bad dream. My work-rough hands traced the wall as I walked its length, counting ceiling tiles, trying to breathe around the weight in my chest. $40,000 gone. My credibility shot. And worst of all, I'd let my boy down. Not just about the fishing, but about everything that mattered. When Mark found me, I was staring out the window at the parking lot, watching headlights cut through early evening darkness. "I think I'm done," I told him. "Maybe it's time to admit I got played and focus on whatever treatment we can still afford." Mark's face hardened. "Give me 2 more hours," he said. "There's something weird in these insurance remittance patterns I want to check." I nodded, too tired to argue, and headed back to Ethan's room. He was asleep now, small hand curled on top of the blanket they'd warmed for him. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, making everything feel slightly unreal. I pulled out that damn cashier's check stub again, the one I'd been carrying like a talisman. $40,000. The number that had seemed like hope last week now felt like a brand marking my stupidity. But as I stared at it, something shifted inside me. The shame started hardening into something else, something with edges sharp enough to cut. You know that moment when fury gets so hot it goes cold? When it stops being about feelings and starts being about facts? That's where I found myself, sitting there watching my boy breathe under hospital blankets. The clock had just ticked past midnight when Mark slipped back in. Without a word, he laid a folder on the bed table. Inside were printouts covered in highlighting and his precise handwriting. "Look at the patient counts," he said quietly. "Then look at the names." I did. Then I looked again. The numbers didn't match, not even close. The clinic was billing for nearly twice as many patients as they could possibly handle in their space. And the names, ghost patients, Mark confirmed. They're billing under fake names and writing it off as charity care. But the money's still flowing somewhere. My hands were steady as I traced the pattern he'd uncovered. Every ghost patient, every fake treatment, tied back to one address, Dr. Randall's private clinic. "This is it," I breathed. "This is what we needed." I could see it. All now. How we could use this to force action. A public expose would bring scrutiny. An emergency injunction would freeze assets. Between those two pressures. "You sure this holds up?" I asked Mark. "In daylight, I mean. In front of people who can actually do something?" He nodded slowly. "It holds. The numbers don't lie, and I've got 3 independent sources backing the data." Through the window, I could see the sky starting to bruise into that peculiar pre-dawn gray. Ethan shifted in his sleep, and I adjusted his blanket automatically. Looking at him, I felt that cold fury sharpen into perfect focus. Time to stop playing defense. Ever built a case against someone who thought they were untouchable? It's like assembling a bear trap. Every piece has to lock perfectly, or the whole thing fails when you need it most. Mark and I spent the next 4 hours turning that folder of evidence into a weapon. We spread papers across the foot of Ethan's bed while he slept, keeping our voices low as we connected the dots between shell companies and ghost billings. The winter night pressed against the windows, but neither of us felt tired. We had that electric focus that comes when you're finally fighting back instead of just taking hits. "We need to scrub any real patient names," Mark reminded me, highlighting another section. "The story works better if we protect privacy while exposing fraud." I nodded, thinking of all the other families who might have been caught in Randall's web. "What about those compliance emails? The ones that kept brushing us off?" Mark's smile had an edge. "Already pulled quotes. Every time they cited ongoing internal review procedures or established institutional protocols, they handed us ammunition. Shows they knew something was wrong but didn't act. You know what's funny about bureaucrats? They love their formal language until it comes back to bite them. Each dismissive email became another brick in our wall of evidence. I pulled out my banking records next. The cashier's check receipt, withdrawal slips, even the texts arranging those desperate loans from friends. Everything got scanned and organized. My hand shook a little as I wrote out a sworn declaration about handing that check to Randall. Amazing how one piece of paper could hold so much pain and purpose at once. "Your turn," I told Mark around 2 a.m. "Show me how we're telling this story." He pulled up his draft on his laptop. The headline was simple: "Cancer doctors' private clinic bills, dead patients, preys on desperate families." What followed was pure precision. Dates, dollar amounts, shell company connections. No speculation, just facts lined up like bullets. "We're not claiming anything we can't prove," Mark said, scrolling through. "But anyone reading this will see the pattern clear as day." I remembered something my dad used to say about chess. Sometimes the threat of the move is stronger than the move itself. "Soon as this hits," I said, "other families are going to start checking their records." Mark nodded. Domino effect. "But first, we need those accounts frozen so nothing disappears." I called the pro bono legal clinic as soon as their emergency line opened at 3 a.m. The same lawyer who'd turned us down before was still on duty. This time, when I mentioned documented ghost billing and shell companies, her tone changed completely. "Email everything now," she said. "I can have an emergency injunction ready for filing by 6 a.m. While she worked, a nurse came in for Ethan's fever check. His temperature was up again, but he managed a sleepy smile when I squeezed his hand. I sat close to his bed and whispered our plan like a bedtime story, though I knew he couldn't really hear me. Sometimes saying things out loud helps make them real. "First the article drops," I murmured. "Then the injunction hits. People will read about it over their morning coffee, and by the time Randall knows what's happening, his accounts will be locked tight." Mark touched my shoulder. "Time to schedule it," he said, quietly. I looked at his notebook, open to a fresh page with execution, written at the top in his precise handwriting. Below it, we wrote the time in big block numbers, 6 a.m. The article was already loaded in the content management system. The injunction was ready for electronic filing the instant the courthouse computers came online. All we had to do was wait for dawn. Through the window, I could see the sky starting to lighten. Amazing how the same view that had felt so hopeless a few hours ago now looked like possibility. The publish button on Mark's laptop glowed softly in the dim room. I checked my watch. 5:47 a.m. 13 minutes until we launched our counterattack. My finger hovered over the send button for what felt like forever. Funny how the biggest moments in life often come down to something so small. One click, one word, one decision that changes everything. "Do it," Mark said quietly. I hit send at exactly 6 a.m. Mark's screen showed his article going live at the same instant, and my phone pinged with the courthouse e-filing confirmation. For a second, everything was absolutely silent, except for the soft beep of Ethan's monitors. Then my phone exploded. The first wave was mostly social media notifications as people started sharing Mark's article. Then came the emails. First a trickle, then a flood. The one that really caught my attention was from the court clerk, requesting a supplemental exhibit for the emergency motion. "They're actually reading it," I said, maybe more surprised than I should have been. After weeks of getting stonewalled, having someone official take us seriously felt almost unreal. Mark was already pulling up his own notifications. Comment sections going crazy. A lot of people saying they had similar experiences with Randall. I dug through my files for the bank letter and visitor log copies the clerk wanted. These weren't just papers anymore. They were ammunition, proof that all those nights of detailed record-keeping hadn't been a waste of time. You ever notice how the smallest habits can end up being lifelines? By noon, I'd hand-delivered everything to the courthouse. Walking back into the hospital felt different somehow. The same halls, same antiseptic smell, but the air had shifted. Maybe because of the internal memo I spotted on a nurse's station computer. All staff directed to cooperate fully with ongoing investigation. Mark met me by the elevator, coffee in hand. "You're gonna want to see this," he said. We stood by the nurse's station, trying to look casual as two people in business attire walked purposefully toward Randall's office. They carried clipboards and had that unmistakable investigator energy, like bloodhounds who'd caught a scent. The blinds in Randall's office snapped shut almost immediately after they entered. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was the pro bono lawyer. "TRO granted pending hearing. Accounts frozen." I had to read it twice to believe it. After weeks of feeling like I was shouting into the void, things were finally happening. Real things, legal things, things with teeth. I glanced over at Ethan's room. He was napping peacefully, that ratty old T-Rex plush tucked under his arm like always. For the first time since I'd handed over that cashier's check, I felt something that wasn't anger or fear. It was hope, maybe, or at least its first cousin. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since I couldn't even remember when. I wandered over to the vending machine, actually tasting the stale sandwich I bought instead of just mechanically chewing. The elevator dinged again. This time it was suits, hospital counsel by the looks of them, moving with that careful but urgent walk lawyers get when things are hitting fans. And there was Randall, coming down the hall like a thundercloud. His usual smooth confidence was gone, replaced by something harder and darker. His eyes were narrow slits, his lips pressed so tight they'd almost disappeared. He barely glanced at me as he followed the lawyers into the conference room. The whole hallway seemed to hold its breath as those doors closed. You could almost hear the other shoe getting ready to drop. Mark appeared at my elbow. "Show's about to start," he murmured. I nodded, watching the closed conference room door. After weeks of being shut out, it felt pretty good to be on this side of things for a change. You know that moment when everything starts happening at once? When the dominoes you've carefully lined up for weeks finally start falling? That's what the next few hours felt like. My phone kept buzzing with notifications. First came the official notice. Authorities had frozen every account connected to Randall's clinic. Then the state medical board dropped their hammer. Emergency suspension of Randall's license pending a full investigation. Ever see a castle made of sand when that first big wave hits? It was like that. But the real kicker was watching all those stone walls suddenly turn to paper. Remember those countless emails I'd sent? The ones that bounced back with policy speak and dismissals? Now they were falling over themselves to follow up on your previous inquiry and ensure full transparency. Amazing how quickly things can change when the spotlight hits, isn't it? The hospital's PR machine switched gears so fast I could smell rubber burning. Their new message was all about full cooperation with authorities and patient-first protocols. Even better was watching the staff relax as those rigid script requirements loosened up. Nurses started talking like human beings again instead of policy robots. I was heading back to pediatrics when my phone rang. Unknown number. Usually, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Mr. Mercer? A woman's voice, crisp and professional. This is Sarah Chen from the Clinical Trials Coordination Office. My throat went dry. Yes? We've had an opening in the T-cell modification trial that appears to align with Ethan's markers. I understand you've been seeking placement? I had to lean against the wall. After all the false starts and dead ends, hearing those words felt almost unreal. Yes, we have. Very much so. We'd need to move quickly, she said. The window for this cohort closes this week. I have Ethan's basic labs, but we'd need updated panels and consent forms. There's also a preliminary scan requirement. I scribbled notes on the back of an old receipt, my hand shaking. This was real. This was actually real. But that timeline, my God, that timeline. 24 hours to get everything lined up, and Ethan would need to be stable enough for the scan. After all we'd been through, the window was finally open, but it might as well have been balanced on a knife edge. I can have the consent forms to you within the hour, I said, already mentally mapping the quickest route to the lab. When can we schedule the scan? She gave me a time slot for the next morning, along with a detailed list of prep instructions. I made her repeat them twice, then read them back to her. No room for mistakes now, not when we were this close. Walking back through the hospital felt surreal. The waiting area outside Randall's office was empty now. Just a ghost town of abandoned magazines and cold coffee cups. But the bulletin board caught my eye. Someone had posted a printout of Mark's article, then another, and another. Like flowers blooming on a concrete wall. I pulled one down and folded it carefully into my pocket. Someday, when Ethan's older, he might want to know how all this happened. How? Sometimes justice comes down to paperwork and patience and people who won't stop digging for truth. The sunset was painting the hallway orange as I headed back to Ethan's room. Those familiar monitor chirps guided me home like always. The next 24 hours would test every nerve I had left, but for now, I just watched my boy sleep. His dinosaur pajamas were getting a little tight. We'd need new ones soon. That thought alone felt like victory. The evening nurse came in to check his vitals. Big day tomorrow, she whispered, adjusting his IV with practiced hands. Better get some rest yourself. I nodded, but we both knew I wouldn't sleep. Not with tomorrow's test looming. Not with everything balanced on such a thin edge between then and now. The sun slipped lower, drawing its curtain across another day in this endless game of hope and fear. Ethan stirred slightly, mumbling something about boats in his sleep. I reached for his hand, as much to steady myself as him. Ever tried staying awake for 36 hours straight while your whole world hangs by a thread? Let me tell you. Coffee starts tasting like motor oil around hour 20. I spent that night watching every twitch, every flutter of Ethan's eyelids. The nurses were angels, adjusting meds, checking temps, doing whatever it took to keep him stable for the morning scans. Between rounds, they'd slip me updates about what was happening downstairs. There's maybe 20 parents in the lobby now, whispered Tracy, our night nurse, as she logged Ethan's vitals at 2 a.m. All of them holding that article your friend wrote. Security's trying to keep things calm, but, she shook her head, they want answers. I could picture it, that sterile lobby filling up with other parents who'd been burned, their anger finally finding focus. Part of me wanted to join them, to stand shoulder to shoulder with folks who'd walked the same bitter road. But my fight was up here now, keeping Ethan's fever down and his spirits up for what was coming. Dawn came like molasses, but it came. I helped bundle Ethan into a wheelchair, making sure his IV lines were clear for the trip to imaging. He was groggy but managed to smile when I told him we were going on another adventure. Can we see boats after? He asked, his voice thin but hopeful. Soon as you're stronger, buddy. I promise. The hallways were quiet at that hour. Just the squeak of wheels and the soft beep of distant monitors. We had to pass by Randall's office on the way to radiology. That's when I saw it. A notice taped to his door. Crisp white paper with bold black text. Notice of foreclosure proceedings. Below that, an address I recognized. His private clinic. You know that feeling when you throw a stone in a pond? How the ripples keep spreading. Wider and wider. That's what this was. The first wave had taken his license and frozen his accounts. Now the second wave was coming for his property, his business, everything he'd built on other people's pain. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just posts a notice and waits. The scan itself took forever, but Ethan was a champ through all of it. I kept him distracted with stories about fishing trips we'd take, making up wild tales about catching mermaid-sized bass while the machines hummed and clicked around us. When we finally got the news, I nearly collapsed right there in the hallway. All thresholds met, the trial coordinator said, checking her tablet. We have a bed ready in the trial unit whenever you're ready to move up. The elevator ride to the trial floor felt like ascending into a different world. Tracy, that same nurse who'd first helped me document timeline details in my receipt log, was waiting at the unit desk. Sometimes life hands you these perfect little circles, you know? Look who made it, she said, winking at Ethan as she helped us get settled in the new room. Everything was newer up here. Fresh paint, modern equipment. Even the air felt different somehow. I unpacked Ethan's few belongings while Tracy got his lines sorted. His dinosaur plush found its spot of honor next to the IV pole, and I made sure to set out a fresh marker by the whiteboard. He loved drawing during his long hours in bed, and I wanted everything ready for when he felt up to it. Something fell out when I was emptying his backpack. That crayon drawing of the boat he'd made way back when this nightmare started. I'd forgotten I'd tucked it in there. The paper was soft at the creases now, but the bright colors hadn't faded. I smoothed it carefully and laid it on his tray table. The morning sun was streaming through the windows as the first trial infusion began dripping into Ethan's IV. He dozed off again, peaceful despite all the wires and tubes. I watched each drop fall, counting them like prayers. The hallway felt different that afternoon as I headed back from signing Ethan's trial paperwork. Dr. Randall's nameplate had vanished from his office door, leaving just the ghostly outline where it used to be. You could still see the shape of his name in the paint, like a scar that hadn't quite healed. Remember how hospitals always have those little mail carts they wheel around? There was one parked outside his empty office, practically groaning under the weight of legal documents. I couldn't help myself. I glanced at the top page. License. Suspension order from the medical board, effective immediately. Below that, a stack of formal complaint forms from parents who'd read Mark's article. The papers had that official look. Government letterhead, case numbers, all business. A security guard was escorting 2 more parents to patient relations, their faces set with the kind of determination I knew too well. They each carried copies of Mark's article, folded and marked up with highlighter. Funny how a few pages of newsprint can change everything, isn't it? The coordinator who'd helped get Ethan into the trial, Sarah was her name, caught up with me near the elevator. Just need your signature on this last admission form, she said. All efficiency and straight talk. No sugarcoating, no sales pitch about miracle cures. Just facts and next steps, the way medicine should be. That's what real hope sounds like. Not promises and fancy cufflinks, but honest people doing honest work. Thanks, I told her, for everything. She just nodded and moved on to her next task. Professional to the core. I hadn't been home in 3 days, and man did I need a shower. Told Ethan I'd be back in an hour, tops. He was busy drawing another boat anyway. This one with what looked like a shark fin next to it. The kid's got imagination, I'll give him that. The drive home took me past Dr. Randall's private clinic, or what used to be his clinic. The parking lot was empty except for a weathered foreclosure notice flapping in the wind. Through the front windows, I could see bare walls where diplomas used to hang. All that polished success, stripped down to empty rooms and frozen bank accounts. Funny thing about justice. Sometimes it doesn't come with sirens and handcuffs. Sometimes it's just paper. Articles, court orders, foreclosure notices. Death by 1,000 documents. At home I found that old picture frame I'd bought years ago but never used. Simple thing. Just clean wood and clear glass. Sometimes the plainest tools do the best work, right? My hands were steady as I lifted Ethan's original boat drawing from my wallet where I'd kept it safe. The paper had some creases from being folded, but the crayon colors were still bright. Blue water, brown boat, yellow. Sun rising in the corner. Kid art has this way of cutting straight to what matters. No fancy shading or perspective, just pure hope on paper. I hung it above my desk, right where the morning light would hit it. The frame made it look proper. Important, because it was. This wasn't just a kid's drawing anymore. It was a marker. A milestone. Here's where we turned the corner. Here's where doing right won out over doing easy. Standing there, looking at that little boat heading toward its crayon sunrise, I felt something settle in my chest. Not the wild pride of beating someone down, but something steadier, the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept. I'd told my boy I'd fight smart instead of loud, and by God I had. My fingers traced the edge of the frame, and I heard myself say it soft and clear. No man profits from another father's pain.